So should we pick another question?
Yes. I love this one. Why do we worry about what people think?
And we do, don't we?
Constantly.
I don't care if people say, I don't care what anybody thinks. It's an absolute lie.
Thank you. I agree. It is. 100.
There are some people's opinion that we value less than others, but at the end of the day, we care. And this goes back to actually a really primitive driver, which is when our brain was evolving, particularly our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that has facilitated our ability to be social and work well with others. So we found that it was very important to our survival to be part of the tribe and to have good relationships and to interact with others in a positive social context. So from a very primitive perspective, worrying about what other people think is connected to our survival.
Wow.
Why? Because it's safer in our tribe, it's safer in our group. We need connection to live. We need people to look after each other in the community. It's all of that.
Yeah, if you are ostracized from the tribe, your life could be in danger.
Yeah. Have you heard about this, I don't even know if it's related, a test where they've done a test on, I think it was animals, which I really feel sad about, animal lover, but where they left a puppy on its own to grow up without any form of connection, and then they did one with a family, obviously, that was really loved and connected and felt that. And the puppy that was more isolated was had a very short life. And they were using that to kind of describe the concept of this. If you don't have connection and you don't have that sort of tribe and that feeling and that love and there's a bit of loneliness, it actually kills you earlier.
There's been studies now around that, that it's as bad as smoking or alcoholism and things like that.
Loneliness.
Loneliness is actually a killer. It can shorten your life quite drastically. Yeah.
Human beings are wired for connection. This is our default state. In order to be successful as humans, we need to connect with others. And there's been lots of research showing that our brain develops more effectively when we connect with others.
That's the important part. So therefore, because we need to do that, of course we're going to worry about what people think.
We're managing our relationships and protecting our relationships in order to maintain those connections.
So what about if we have a negative relationship, meaning we're still worrying about what they're thinking, but it's actually not serving us because the relationship maybe is actually not that good for us, or the other person's not reciprocating, or whatever it may be? What kind of the things is that actually a good thing? Do we just keep going and do we just keep trying to connect, or should we do something about that? Because in the question, it's more around worrying about people and what they think of us when it's actually causing damage. And how do we kind of control that?
And I think it's about taking one step back from that and asking yourself why you care so deeply about what that person thinks.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if their opinion has no impact on your life, but you still care what they think, there's a deeper motivation behind that. So it may be that you want to maintain a negative, I just stuffed that up. It may be that you want to maintain a positive self-concept. So as human beings, we like to think of ourselves in a positive way. And if somebody says something to you that challenges that self-concept, that can be incredibly triggering and can stay with us. And we try to rationalize it out and understand why that person would say something like that to us, which can cause rumination, which can then cause anxiety. But I want to say something that is really, really important for everybody to remember, is that somebody else's behavior towards you is more a function of what is going on for them as opposed to anything about you.
There you go.
So how, if you are asking yourself why, because I have a couple of incidences of these in my life, definitely, of people who they're not even in my life anymore and haven't been for a while, but I do worry about what they think. And I actually don't know why. how can you kind of dig deeper into that? Because I think for a lot of
Great
people
question.
listen to this, if they are able to let it go, would be so much happier and so much more freer as a result. So how do we go about going through that process?
So it's about understanding the emotions and the thoughts that that person triggers in you.
Yes.
So it goes back to that self-awareness piece again. So if somebody who's not in your life life anymore, but has some kind of influence over the way that you are, when you are triggered by that person, it's about checking in with yourself and going, okay, what's happening for me right now? What is the emotion I'm feeling about that person? And what am I thinking as a result of being triggered? And that can be the clue as to, why you care so much about what that person thinks. It might be somebody that you respect very much. I remember when I was in I was in high school actually, and the headmistress said to me one day, "You're really maturing, Diane, great girl." And I was absolutely triggered by that. And when I think about that incident now, I feel a bit emotional about it, because it was very important to me that she thinks that I am amazing. And even her choice of words was triggering, that you are maturing, not that you are mature. So, and I held her in very high respect. So, and that has stayed with me. The reason, I'm telling this story now is because that's something that comes to mind, that's triggered in me when we think about people who aren't in our life anymore, but whose opinions we value.
Matter, yeah. Wow. Okay.
So
Interesting.
I think it's on ourselves a little bit to be conscious of that, and then when it's not serving you, maybe is to actually find ways to understand what is that connection. Why do you care so much? If it's not serving you, maybe some of the things you can do is try and change your expectation of why it's so valuable.
Yeah, that's right. It's about challenging the thoughts, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
So if a thought that you're having as a result of somebody's negative opinion of you is that they think that I'm an idiot. So this thought that you've had is pretty negative, and what you can do is challenge that thought. So what evidence is there to say that I am an idiot? What evidence is there to say that I'm not? And the chances are that you're not going to be able to support that thought.
Your random thought that just keeps firing out there.
Yeah. So it's called disputational thought challenging, which is part of the basis of cognitive behavioural therapy.
I think it's a self-aware thing as well, right? I think if you don't know who you are and you base your opinion of yourself on what other people have got to say about you, then you are going to really care what people think. Whereas I honestly believe, and I've definitely been on this personal journey, once you kind of know who you are and you can forgive yourself and you can honor who you are, it doesn't really matter what other people think.
I agree. That's how I do
and
it.
that's when you start kind of letting it go a bit more, once you establish your own self-worth.
Yeah. And that's like even with dealing with gossip and things like that in the workplace, and that I really have zero time for it. And I think it's because I just don't care. But obviously everyone cares.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's just that way of me processing of what evaluating and my thought and labels that I put around whatever's going on, whether it's true or not, and where are the facts.
Yeah. And we need to really understand whether we're gaining our self-concept and our self-worth intrinsically or extrinsically. Yeah. Right? If we're getting our self-worth intrinsically, that is really connected to our values. So who we are as a person and what is important to us and how it is important for us to be. And if we are living up to our values, that's where we can draw our self-worth and self-concept intrinsically. When we are gaining our self-concept extrinsically, it's really based on what others think of us and what other people tell us about ourselves. And, when I look at teenagers these days, I really fear for their self-worth and self-concept because of social media. Their self-evaluation and their self-worth is being gained extrinsically.
Absolutely.
They're not stopping to think about what is important to them and what their values are and whether they are being a good person and who they want to be. They're relying too heavily on what people on
external
social
factors.
media
They don't
platforms
even
are
have
saying.
bloody time to be self-reflective anymore to do that.
With the noise going on,
Yeah.
with everything in their life, plus their schedules, plus the pressure. And
It's,
everything.
they don't. It's not just the fact that they're getting that external battering of opinions and likes and comments and engagement on their social media, and you should look like this, and you should look like this, and you should be doing this. But actually, just having the time, because that self-reflective.
But they probably do have the time. It's just choice, right?
Well, it's actually about skill set as well. So we can remember that our brain is still developing and is not fully mature until our mid to late 30s. So teenagers have a very limited ability to actually be self-reflective. So what we need to do as role models and adults and parents and aunts and uncles and people in position of influence, we need to help teenagers to co-regulate, to actually develop that skill of checking in with themselves and also being able to, giving the coping strategies to be able to deflect what is going on externally to them.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Wow,
That is some really good tips.
amazing.
And that applies for everyone, not just the teenagers. But yeah, looking at how to manage the external factors is really important. Thank you. Next question.
Next question. Is it me or you?
You.
Okay. Go into the head. Ooh. Okay. What is anxiety and how does it feel? So I think we could all around this table go quite hard on this question. I'm really interested to know neurologically what is happening in our brains when an anxiety is starting to build.
Okay.
I'd love that because I know how it feels. But I think there's a lot of people who are listening to
No,
this. who
a
know
lot
how
of
it
people
feels.
don't know how it feels. They label it as something else and they don't really know. Like I was one of those. I didn't know. I never thought I'd ever get anxiety. Now I'm labeling it because I'm more in touch with my feelings. But
See, what's interesting there is I never knew until I was in my mid-20s that I'd always been anxious. I'd
Exactly.
normalised anxiety.
Exactly.
And actually I look back and I was having close to panic attacks as a teenager. Never knew what it was.
exactly. So that's what I'm saying. I think we need to know what is anxiety, how does it feel, and then obviously the neurological side as well.
Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to differentiate between anxiety and an anxiety disorder.
Oh, yes, they are two very different things.
Yeah.
Right.
So being anxious or anxiety is actually the body's natural response to stressful or threatening situations. We need a level of stress in our lives in order to keep ourselves safe, to keep ourselves alive, to protect ourselves, and in order to get to performance as well. And that is called eustress. So the good stress in our lives, the good anxiety in our lives, eustress, EUSTRESS. And Yerkes-Dodson talks about this in their very famous curve called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which talks about arousal, stress, and human performance. So we do need a certain amount of anxiety or stress in our lives. So when we don't have the ability to regulate that anxiety or regulate that stress is when we move into a space where anxiety becomes a problem. And so what's happening in our brain is when we feel stress or when we feel threat and we feel those anxious feelings, the part of our brain that is sort of the smoke detector for the brain called the amygdala is triggered, and that triggers our fight, flight or fright response. So it causes those feelings of, the heart racing, blood pressure increasing and that sensation of feeling sort of on edge. Now, in normal emotional relation, I shouldn't say normal, I should say in effective emotional regulation, we would feel that emotion and then we would regulate ourselves back down to a baseline again. But when people don't have those emotional regulation strategies for whatever reason, whether it be a chemical imbalance, whether it be environmental stresses, whether it be the basis of a mental illness, that is when anxiety can become a disorder, and we stay in that anxious state constantly, which causes all sorts of health problems.
Or it's triggered. I mean, for me, I suffered with, like I said, and I'm pretty open about this, mainly because I think it's something that built up over time, over a very, very long period of time, to the point where it went into full-blown panic disorder. So when you get to that point, it's not just about you having that on-edge feeling for longer. Okay. So let's just say, Pauline, let's say you don't suffer from anxiety and I suffered from anxiety. What that might look like is we're at work and our boss comes in and says, we've got half an hour to get this proposal over the line, or, this is going to be the consequence. And both of us go, right, okay, adrenaline starts pumping. Yeah. That's normal. Okay. There's that bit of on edge, but then maybe once we've done it, or 20 minutes later, yours starts to dissipate. Mine could keep going all day. But once it kind of goes one step further than that, which is what happened to me, which was I'd wake up in the morning and be in my bed quite safe and instantly start freaking out, like having that, oh my God, I'm going to have this happening today. I'm going to have this happening today. And I couldn't think of anything else. I'd feel sick, like just nervous constantly, exhausted all the time because your body's just on constantly. And even at weekends, I remember going up, we were in Tasmania and we were hiking up a mountain. And I just, for some reason, it hit me that it was the day that something was going on at work. And did I remember to send that email before I went away? And then suddenly I'm going down this whole rabbit hole in my brain of, oh my God, I don't think I did. And I haven't got my phone with me. And what if they can't do this? What if the team can't go and do this because I did something? What if my boss is now mad back up? And I'm in Tasmania up a mountain, thinking of all the stuff that could be going back and freaking out to the point where I'm literally, getting the shakes, and worry. And, Ben, my husband's like, what's wrong? I can see you look really worried about something. And that is when it's a disorder. That's because there's no trigger there. There's nothing happening. It's just it's like your body's just so used to being on edge that it just, whenever there's a lull, it just kicks in again. It's horrible.
So I think there was a trigger. Oh. Because anxiety can be triggered by things that happen in our environment, but they can also be triggered by our own internal thoughts. So just having a thought can be enough to trigger anxiety. So you had a thought just pop into your head, and thoughts pop into our head all the time.
Yes.
Especially when we are not on task. So you are climbing up a mountain.
Do you know what I actually think? I'm just sorry to interrupt you, but I actually think I was going up a mountain thinking, isn't this beautiful? Not bad for a Monday or Tuesday or something. And then thinking I wasn't at work. That's what I was thinking. Yes. And that's when it started. I then started to think of work and is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. So when we are not on task, when we are exercising or walking up a mountain or driving a car, what happens is our default mode network is active. And so what our default mode network does is it just pops thoughts into our head that we can process.
I'm pretty sure I've talked about this because it used to freak me out. And then until you told me, no, this is just your brain trying to answer something, just random stuff coming out.
So what is it? Just stuff will just pop in?
Yeah, so we have a task-focused network, which is, when we're on task and we're doing whatever we're doing. And the default mode network is the kind of the daydreamy network, when we're not actually on a task, when we're not focused. And that's when we do a lot of our processing, actually. It's when we have moments of insight, those aha moments when, answers just come to us because we've made a connection in the back of our brain. And because we're not focused on something, we can hear it.
Yes.
So you were probably in default mode network, just kind of daydreaming. A thought popped into your head, which has then triggered your anxiety. Right. And then you got ramped up very quickly because people who do have a challenge with anxiety tend to be able to ramp up physiologically very quickly, and then not have the ability to regulate themselves back down out of it.
It's a very, having had the anxiety disorder, panic disorder illness, which it is an illness, it takes a lot of work for it to shift, because actually what then happens, and if anyone is listening to this will be like, absolutely, I know exactly what you're talking about right now, because my friend who went through the same thing was like, I've never, yes, you've got it absolutely on point, which was, you can think you're over it, and then it might be a few months of you not really of having anxiety. You put all of these coping things in place. You're meditating, you're doing yoga, you're starting to talk to yourself and differentiate between what a thought is, what an anxious thought is, and does it serve me, and what's real and what's not. You're really getting yourself in a good place. And then suddenly you have a normal amount of anxiety, right? Which, because like you said before, you just have it in your day, and you do. Anxious feelings you're never going to get rid of them completely. It's impossible. And what happens is that freaks you out so much that you start to then take yourself on the train of anxiety again. And you think, it's coming back. It's coming back. And the fear of anxiety, of you having this anxiety disorder, just gives you it again. And it's a horrible spiral that you go down during recovery that I feel like everyone should be aware of. That you don't just switch this off overnight. You actually need to learn to allow anxiety in, let it sit, and then regulate yourself again. Don't be fearful of ever feeling the feelings, because
That's a great tip.
it will literally send you
Bonkers.
you get all upset and think you've gone backwards when you haven't. You're just experiencing a normal level. And that is what I think is something very practically speaking. If you are on the road to recovery, or you are thinking you've got a friend who is, they are going to feel anxiety within the next few weeks or the next few months. And you need to tell them, or tell yourself, that's okay.
It's okay.
And you're not going to go backwards.
And how are people going to recognize that? And then let's talk about tools.
So I think you've raised two really good points there, which is just because you have an anxiety disorder doesn't mean that is your lot in life.
No, definitely not.
You can get help. You can develop strategies. You can develop your emotional regulation abilities in order to shift out of that. So that's number one. The second thing is that we humans have this very unique skill, which is to be able to have feelings about our feelings.
Yes, that's what it is. So you have anxiety about anxiety.
Metacognition. Yeah.
Metacognition.
Yeah. Wow. So when we have a feeling about a feeling that we're having, or we think about the way that we think.
Yeah, I think that's when I'm over prosecuting whatever my thought is.
We're complex creatures, aren't we?
We are complex.
Jeez.
Yeah. So what you're describing there is having an anxious feeling about being anxious,
yes,
which then triggers the spiral and the rumination. So there are two ways that you can address anxiety. One is called a top-down approach, which is a cognitive approach where we manage our thinking in order to regulate the anxiety. Or there's a bottom-up approach, which is more experiential, which is about grounding and relaxation and mindfulness.
Oh, yoga and actually those, physical therapies.
I did both for a long time.
Yeah. Whereas my habit is I talk to myself. So whenever I feel an anxious thought, I verbalize. If I'm on the phone, it's normally whenever I'm on the phone and I'm rushing. And if someone's asking me something, I just don't have the time to answer. I just go, I'm feeling a bit anxious. Can I talk about this later?
Yeah.
And I label it, and then they're like, oh, yeah.
So that would be a top-down approach, which is a cognitive approach.
Right.
Often what we find in the therapeutic sense is that in order to manage anxiety, you actually need to deal with the body first, before you go to a cognitive place. So it's often useful to start with a bottom-up approach before going to a top-down approach. What was your experience with that?
Yes. So mine was definitely at the start, going through the therapy that I went through was all about breathing exercises, which when she started saying that, I thought, oh, for God's sake, this is not going to help me. Like, what are you talking about?
Yep.
It was actually amazing because it was used, and I still use it now as a real, to tap into that whole parasympathetic nervous system, just to calm my body, because what for me, I didn't like was when it got out of control, where it turned into a panic attack. And I had regular panic attacks for when it was at its peak. I haven't had a panic attack now for about 2 years. I've been close to one a couple of times, but I've not had, and I don't actually think now that I could, because I know what to
Because you got
do.
the tools.
Yeah, 100%. I know that I could
And
actually stop it. But that whole tapping into my parasympathetic nervous system, like meditating, the deep breathing, the bottom up stuff, that was really good, just to calm me and kind of bring me down to here, so that if anything happened, I wouldn't tip out of the whole bucket, like my body naturally was at about 90% of stress, of my bucket was full. So anything over would be, whereas that brought me down so I could cope a little bit more. And then from there, it was, now you've kind of created a bit of calm. You've now in a position where you've got a bit of space to process, stop, catch it when it comes in, start to talk, and go through that top-down approach. And I think you need to do it. And it's interesting that now what I do is, whenever I feel like I'm starting to go down old pathways, I'll take myself off and I will do the breathing, I'll do the meditation, I'll have a personal day where I have, an Epsom salt bath, and I'll really put my body into a calm state. And then I will, it's almost like a pattern. It's now over the couple of years.
It's like a ritual you've created.
It is. It's a little ritual. It is. My body's like, okay, so now you're starting to think a bit more and be a bit clearer on, and capture that worried thought and question it a bit more. So that's all I need to do now. But it takes a long time to program yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a lot of patience, which I don't have.
Well, you do now.
I do now, but I'm not a patient person, and I'm also not a kind to myself person. So I think that's another thing. You have to be nice to yourself throughout this process. Beating yourself up about being anxious, beating yourself up about the fact that you're having a panic attack and can't control your emotions is not going to help you in any way.
That's amazing. Those are really good tips. A bit of self-love, that's because that's all what we all need.
Yeah, dealing with anxiety from sort of bottom-up approach makes sense neurobiologically as well, because it's actually an inverse relationship between our emotional brain and our prefrontal cortex, which is where we have all of our abilities to be cognitive and analyse and think and make decisions. So when our emotional brain or our limbic system is triggered and our fight, flight or fright response is triggered, what happens is that we direct all of our blood down to our heart, lung and limbs, so we can run away or we can fight.
Wow.
Yes. So as a result, our cognitive function actually goes down. So if you can imagine yourself in a situation where you are intensely threatened. So a car comes around the corner, if you stepped out onto the road, you act immediately. You use your body in order to save yourself from that threatening situation. You don't stand there and think,
Let me just stare at that building.
what should we do? What are our options here?
No, so true.
Our emotional brain acts first, and then our cognitive brain catches up, like within a margin of a second later. And so this is how we survive threatening situations. So in terms of anxiety, the first part of our brain to respond is our emotional brain, and then our cognition comes later. So in order to have great cognition, we actually need to manage those emotions and that physiological response.
So to reap the rewards of top-down anxiety approach and in terms of treatment and trying to actually talk through your problems and work on your brain, you really need to start with taking care of your body and emotion, breathing and all of that kind of stuff to then get yourself in an optimum state to then go
top down
and do that.
Yeah.
Great.
I love that. And I will try not to say that in public. I'm sorry, my body's just warming up because I want to run away from you.
Sorry, I can't use my brain right now because all the blood's in my legs because I'm trying to run away from you.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for listening to another Splash of Colour. Tune in next week for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify or iTunes channel. Or you can always check us out on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn.